Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. We're here to wrap up the fall, honestly. We're going to talk about a couple of teams we haven't talked about yet this fall, teams whose fall reports just came out within the last week or so as we're recording this. We've also got some news out of Florida, so we'll start with that here in just a minute. First, want to say thank you to our friends at Academy Sports and Outdoors for sponsoring this and every episode of Highway to Hoover during the calendar year of 2025. Much thanks to those folks over there for being a part of the team. Very much enjoyed that partnership. Mark, we are barreling towards Christmas season here. We're 8 days as we record this from Christmas. So actually, programming note, we probably will not have an episode next week unless some crazy news breaks or something compels us to come to the microphones. Right. We'll have Christmas week off, so just make sure you make that note kind of mentally there. I'm glad I brought that up because I would have forgotten to say it otherwise. But Mark, happy holidays to you and your family. Yeah. Hope you guys are all getting ready for Christmas.
Yeah, we are. Do you have all your Christmas shopping done?
I do. Yeah. Thankfully, we have now moved into a phase as a family where now instead of every person buying a gift for every other person, we do like a Secret Santa gift swap kind of thing.
Big fan of that.
Yeah, it makes it a lot easier. And then, you can spend a little more money on one person and get them something real nice. And you don't have to spend all this time checking off a checklist of a million people to get it done. So yeah, I actually got done early this year for the first time in forever that I can say that. So definitely a relief. What about you?
Yeah, I'm pretty much done. I've got one and oh boy, she's not here. I've got one that I ordered Black Friday and it still has not arrived yet.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and I'm checking and it says it's guaranteed by December 24th, which I'm sure it's going to roll in at 11:59, right? Right as Santa's on the rooftop there. It's
right.
I'm sure hopeful it gets here, but it's for my wife, so it's an important one.
It's a big one. Yeah. That's true. I've gotten all the shopping part done. I am waiting on some things, but I'm confident. I'm going to have trust in our wonderful parcel carriers, whether it's, UPS, Postal Service, whatever. I'm going to have trust in the system because I know this time of year they are working really hard out there, and I definitely do not envy them this time of year out there delivering packages.
I thought that, you order it in November, you're not really sweating it out. Because we've all done it where you order something last minute and it's going to get here in time and you're sweating it out. This one,
you'd have thought,
right? So
that's right. You would have thought. All right, Mark, let's get into some newsy items here. This actually just came out last couple of days. We're recording, like I said, Wednesday, December 17th. Kevin O'Sullivan is returning to the dugout at Florida. This was not a guarantee at various points of this process when he was put on a leave of absence. But Florida set out a set of parameters and expectations for Kevin O'Sullivan, and all of which have been met. It sounds like Kevin O'Sullivan has done what he needs to do, has taken it seriously, has checked those boxes, and now he's back. And certainly, if you're Florida, as much as everyone around the program, you saw them, I saw them, and everybody was saying all the right things about. We're still focused on all of our goals, and Tom Slater has been a good leader of the program, and I don't doubt that, by the way. But still, though, having the guy back in the dugout who you expected to have back in the dugout certainly makes you feel a little more confident in what we're going to see on the field in Gainesville come 2026.
Yeah, it's certainly a disruptive fall. Not just with Sully's absence, but Chuck Girolamo takes the Tennessee assistant job after that change, and then and all that happens kind of at the same time with Sully going out and Girolamo's shift, and then Tom Slater comes in, former head coach at Auburn, comes in and he's the acting head coach while Sully was away. All of that, obviously none of that is ideal when you're trying to lay out your fall. However, because what's the term? Nature hates a void. So when things are missing, other people get a chance to step up, right? And I do think that's going to be fascinating to see what Florida does, because you have had some people who've had to step into different roles, both from a coaching standpoint, but also from a leadership standpoint. When you're not getting that same voice in the dugout, your players can't. You hope that your leadership on your team feels some of that, and that can pay huge dividends this spring. That's what I'm fascinated to see on the field, is what kind of impact the one is Sully the same Sully after being away, having some time to introspect and those kinds of things. What do we see from him? Does he take a different role without Geralem in there? Things that Chuck might have been taken care of now. Maybe Slate takes some and Sully takes some. And what is the impact on the team? And then also, that's a really talented roster. I mean, there's no reason this team can't go out and be one of the top in the country. Just so much on the mound to work with. They've got a really good lineup as well. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to be excited if you're Florida. And with Sully coming back for what's this, his 19th year, I believe. I mean, who's been more successful than him over the course of his time there? So certainly the track record's there, and I'm eager to see what they look like after such a we'll just say a unusual time this fall.
Yeah, I think there's a very real chance we get a really reinvigorated Kevin O'Sullivan, which, could be scary for the rest of the SEC. But to your point, I think some of it could just come from, hey, sometimes time away is good for you. You kind of miss what you loved about something, or you're able to realize that you maybe had taken some things for granted, all that kind of stuff. And then also the point you make, I think is good, in that he had a longtime assistant in Chuck Geralem, and that I'm sure he was delegating quite a bit of stuff to.
Yeah.
And now you've got Tom Slater, who's a very accomplished hitting coach, very well respected, but he doesn't really have the lay of the land in the same way. And so Kevin O'Sullivan is almost certainly going to have to be more hands-on this year than he has been. And you wonder if that kind of re-engages him a little bit. I'm not suggesting he was resting on his laurels by any stretch of the imagination, but you know how it goes. You've been somewhere almost 20 years. It's easy to kind of, take a step back and get in a groove and again, take things for granted. I think there's a chance, though, that this kind of reinvigorates him and the Florida program. Not that they necessarily needed some massive reinvigoration. They've been to Omaha twice in the last 3 or 4 years, whatever it is. But I do think there's a chance we just see like a completely different, not different, but just a completely energized Kevin O'Sullivan.
Yeah, and for his sake, certainly you hope that all of this, that he's been through, we all grow from these things, right? You go through something that's unpleasant for you, and you're able to take those lessons and apply them to the next step in your journey. And we're all hopeful that that's what comes out of this.
Let's move on to talking some fall ball, Mark. Like I said, we're going to wrap up kind of our fall coverage. We've kind of done deep dives on every SEC team throughout the fall. We've got 2 more to do today, and that's Oklahoma and Tennessee, teams that I did the fall reports on. They've been out. They both come out here within the last week. But teams that, just because we can't see everybody every fall, teams that you and I have not laid eyes on. But, I talked with Skip Johnson this fall. I talked with Josh Elander this fall to write those fall reports. So feel like I have a little bit of the lay of the land, if you will, with those teams. And we'll start with Oklahoma. And I actually want to throw this back to you, because you went to L. Dale Mitchell last year.
I did.
On one of your trips. And the biggest news, I think, in the big picture for Oklahoma of late, is that they are moving forward with the stadium renovation project. The Kimry family as the principal donors on that project. I know they're very grateful to that family for jumping in there. From where you sit, Mark, how big of a deal is that, given what you saw at L. Dale Mitchell, and the fact that I think Skip told me it had been since like 1980 since they had done anything with the actual structure of the stadium? They'd done some, video board and clubhouse and all that kind of stuff, but the actual structure, I think he told me, has not been touched since I believe 1980. I'll fact check that, but it's been a while.
Yeah.
Moral of the story.
Well, certainly it's a dated facility, and I know last year they were starting to do some things. They added some outfield seating, kind of premium with the the bartender and the hanging over the wall kind of thing out there, and that was kind of the first step in what it's going to become. I think the big takeaway is that if you go, you go to Oklahoma and you compare, if you're on a recruiting visit and you go there and you compare that to the other teams in the SEC, it was going to come up short. And now with what's been envisioned, they're going to be on a level playing field with pretty much anybody and above some. And I do think that that's only going to help. And in Oklahoma, I mean, they've been able to bring talent in. Certainly, a lot of good teams, before they came to the SEC. Now you're elevating because everybody you play is going to be, even at a higher level. So you've got to keep up. And I do think that being able to have this showcase kind of facility, it at a minimum brings you even, right? And depending on who you're being compared against, maybe gives you an edge in some of these, depending on how it shakes out. And then you look at all the other administrative support, what's the rev share going to look like? Are there NIL opportunities? Certainly with Skip keeps putting pitchers into pro ball. I mean, there are a lot of reasons to be excited about Oklahoma baseball. One thing, since you talked to Skip, I'd be curious about, they've had so much success putting those pitchers into pro ball, but they lost a really good rotation from last year. What did he tell you there? What can you learn, and what did you learn, and what can you tell us about what to expect on the mound?
Yeah, first of all, you mentioned losing the entire rotation. It's actually the third time that's happened to them in the last 6 seasons. The entire 2020 rotation, that was the rotation that featured Cade Cavalli, Dane Acker was in that rotation. 2022 rotation all got drafted. That was the Jake Bennett led rotation. David Sandlin, I believe, was in that rotation. Right. That was they got a couple wins away from national title in that season. And then last year, the entire rotation gets drafted, headlined obviously by the Witherspoon brothers.
Right.
It sounds like it's just been one big competition this fall or in the fall, according to Skip Johnson, which I think is probably an oversimplification of it, but I do think it does hint at what the focus has been, where it's just been like we're replacing enough here to where we just need to keep a totally open mind about who does what. Mm-hmm. And, we're not going to pigeonhole anybody. We're not going to put limits on anybody. We're just going to go see, we're going to roll the ball out there onto the mound and just let everybody go. Now, that being said, I think there are from a rotation standpoint, some serious candidates that I think you have to look at first. I think one of them is LJ Mercurius, transfer from UNLV. Good athlete, fast arm, put up good numbers last year with the Rebels. Obviously, he's taken a step up in competition level, but he pitched for Team USA over the summer in their training camp. And I saw his outing, and he looked like he belonged on that field. And if you can belong on that field, you can belong on any field at this level. Good. So, right, it's a fastball, up to 97 miles an hour last year, swing and miss slider, swing and miss changeup. It's SEC level stuff. Like there's really no doubt about that. The question for him, if he's in the rotation, is, last year he jumped in the rotation late for UNLV last year. He didn't crack 60 innings last year. Mm-hmm. So if he's going to be a day one rotation guy, he's going to have to be a 70, 75, 80 inning type of starting pitcher. And he's not the biggest guy in the world. So can he physically hold up to that, I think is going to be the question, because the stuff is not in question. So he's kind of where I would start. I think there's also Drew Rarick, who was a big time recruit at Texas last year and just never quite cracked the mix there at Texas. Texas had a really tight, stable of pitchers they really liked to use, and everybody who was outside of that really didn't see a bunch of time. But Skip was really high on Drew Rarick, was one of the first names out of his mouth when I talked to him, when we started talking about pitchers he was excited about. So I think he's there. And there's a couple guys that I think are developmental guys, which I think is what Skip and Oklahoma have done so well, because it's with just a couple of exceptions. If you think back to the guys that we talked about in the rotations that have been drafted, it's not day one, supernova of a pitcher who just shows up on campus and then is awesome and spends 3 years there. It's, the Witherspoon brothers kind of making gradual steps, or junior college transfers who come in and are just workhorses. It's typically developmental guys. And So I'm looking at Gavin Jones and Michael Catalano, two guys who last year had roles, but they weren't starters. They were relievers for the most part. They both went out to the Cape and pitched pretty well, and they both looked the part of starters to me, especially Catalano. I mean, it's it's like a 4-pitch mix. It's a smooth delivery. The stuff is good. It's not necessarily great, but it's good, and he carries his stuff through his outings. Just feels like he has like a feel for how to be a starting pitcher, which I think is an important piece of the puzzle. So those are also two guys that I would look at there. But I think that the big thing with them is that they're coming from from a pitching standpoint. The rotation is not going to have to be nearly as good as it was last year because they bring back so much in the bullpen. Yes, they lose Dylan Crooks, and I don't want to downplay that necessarily, but they bring in some transfers like a Mason Bixby and a Jackson Cleveland. But to that, they add those guys too. Reed Hensley, who was a big setup guy last year, Jason Bowden, who's a big arm setup guy, Jaden Barfield, who was a situational guy last year, but I think is probably going to have a bigger role this time around. And if that bullpen is as good as advertised, I think it's a situation where the rotation is going to have some pressure taken off of it, because it's not going to be a situation where, hey, we need you to be the next Kyson Witherspoon, because obviously that's not a really realistic expectation to put on someone. So I think those two things kind of play off each other. Yes, they do have some intriguing rotation candidates, but to me, they have the luxury of being able to kind of maybe play around a little bit more with who's in the rotation, because it's not going to be perfect for one.
Yeah. Well, one guy I wanted to ask you about, and I've told this story before. I saw Cam Johnson as a freshman his fall year at LSU, and I mean he was unhittable. I thought, this is a can't miss guy, and he missed. And then he went to Oklahoma last year and he was serviceable early in the year, stayed in the rotation for a while, and then it went south, and he never really got it back. I've heard good things this fall, but what can you tell me? What should we expect? Because obviously we're really good at predicting how he's going to be. So, Joe, I'm going to put you on the spot this time. What are we going to see out of Cam Johnson this year at Oklahoma?
Yeah, so far we're 0 for 2 on Cam Johnson prediction, but we're going to go up there and swing again. We're going to take some big hacks.
Choke up.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to try to at least put the ball in play here. Yeah. The big thing for him this year, because Skip, again, was effusive in his praise.
Yeah.
And it's why I'm still willing to take a chance. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong again. But I'm willing to take that chance, because Skip Johnson is not the type. You know him. Anybody who's an Oklahoma fan kind of understands who he is. Like, he's not really a guy who goes out of his way to, like, he's not chatty. Let's put it that way. He's not a chatty guy. So if he goes out of his way to be effusive in his praise about somebody, like, I'm going to listen, because he's not that type of guy by nature. And he immediately went to Cam Johnson when we were talking about pitchers this fall. And for him, he said the biggest thing was the mental piece. Like, the stuff has never really been in question. And I think in the past, we've fixated on, when we talk about what has gone wrong with Cam Johnson, I think we fixated on the command. Yeah. And I'm not saying that that's not an issue. It has been an issue. But Skip really focused on the mental piece. And he used an example from the fall where he came into a game and just immediately gives up a bomb. And in a past, he used the example, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, in the example of in the past, that inning would just get away from him.
Right.
But in this situation, he bared back down and he got the outs he needed to get out of the inning. And that to Skip signaled that he's working with a different pitcher now. And so we'll see. I'm still a little, I'm a little bit skeptical this time around. Like we both bought in pretty hard last year and the year before. I have a little more skepticism now, of course, but when you're starting from that level of talent and you've got someone who's been around as long as Skip telling me that the mental piece is where it needs to be now, then I'm going to be cautiously optimistic they're going to get something out of him this year. I think maybe we can, I don't want to put limits on him, but maybe we can take off the table that some of the expectations we had for him when he arrived at LSU. And in that way, I think of a guy like a Christian Little, right? Where he shows up at Vanderbilt and it's like, he pitches in Omaha as a freshman and it's like, oh my God, as a 17-year-old freshman, oh, by the way, and this guy's going to be, by the time he's a junior. He's going to be this,
All-American. Yeah.
But by the time he, right. So he never got there, but by the time he finished LSU, he was a serviceable pitcher on that pitching staff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for Cam Johnson in Oklahoma, while it might be a disappointment if he doesn't turn out to be this workhorse starter that we thought he could be, I do think there's a good chance they're going to get a serviceable arm out of him this year, which I think should be at this point kind of more of the expectation for him.
Yeah, certainly from our standpoint, we hope it clicks because he's so much fun to watch when he's rolling. Another thing I want to ask you about with Oklahoma, I mean, Easton Carmichael was such a big part of that team last year, both behind the plate, but also just leading the offense. How are they going to fill his spots? I know they got two highly regarded guys coming in. Where does that shake out?
Yeah, I think they're going to. So the two guys we're talking about are Dayton LaChance and Brennan Brock. LaChance is from McLennan, which is a powerhouse junior college. Mitch Thompson, who's at Baylor now, was the head coach there for a long time. But JUCO powerhouse. And then Brennan Brock from Southwestern Illinois College. Both guys honestly could have been in pro ball. Like they were both kind of draft risks, and they both got through. LaChance got drafted. And they both got, or maybe it was Brock that got drafted. Mark, you can fact check me on. It was Brock. Okay, thank you. Brock got drafted. LaChance could have easily been drafted.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're both going to play. Now, where they both play, I think maybe it's just a catcher DH situation. We didn't really get into where they might be on the field, or at least Skip didn't volunteer that information. But I think they're both going to ultimately be on the field. And it was one of those things where I like to, when I talk to coaches about, when I talk to coaches for these fall report calls, I typically try to start pretty open-ended with them and just let them kind of guide me into what they want to talk about, like, and so I just kind of said, hey, tell me about the fall. And he was like, oh man, our catchers are really good. And I was like, so you lost Easton Carmichael, who we were talking about this on the main D1 podcast the other day, like might quietly be one of the biggest losses for any roster in the SEC, right? Yeah. And I'm sure they'd love to have Easton Carmichael back. And, oh, by the way, Scott Mudler, who played a lot in his career. I'm sure that they'd love to have those guys around. But if you're not going to have those guys around, having two guys as talented as LaChance and Brock is a nice consolation prize. So they're both going to play. They both put up numbers offensively. Brock is also, we did, I guess, talk a little bit about where else they could go, because he did mention that Brennan Brock is a good athlete, a good runner. So maybe that suggests outfield could be an option. But I would expect both of those guys to be in the lineup. They both put up silly numbers in junior college. And I get that, I get that you can only put so much stock in junior college numbers, but look, you'd rather that than the alternative. So we'll see, but yeah, they're both going to be a big part of the deal because they're both super talented.
Yeah. One more thing on Oklahoma, and then we can transition. I mean, it's a really deep lineup looking at it positionally. Not sure what it's going to look like opening day, but what kind of role do you see Alec Blair playing? The freshman basketball player was a really, really good recruit. Came in, was going to try to do both, and has decided to stick with baseball. Any thoughts there on can he be an immediate impact?
I think he can, but I think it's going to be a deal where he's going to be a different player in May than he is in February, because the reality is that up until now, the last couple of months, he's been splitting his efforts, right? And I think that's good for player development. I think it's good when you have players who in high school play multiple sports, and I think it makes you a better baseball player. But at this level, it does mean that he's probably a little more raw than a lot of the other freshmen they brought in. So I think he's going to have a role. I think he's too talented not to. But I think we might see more of that role come to light as the season rolls on. And part of that's not just because of him maybe being a little bit more raw than others. I think it's also just that, we're talking about an outfield where Jason Walk is back, Trey Gamble is back, Nolan Stevens comes in from Mississippi State, Drew Dickerson is back. They brought in Caden Brumbaugh from Nebraska. Like, it's not like they have a pressing need to just get Alec Blair in the lineup. So I think as like a regular, I think maybe 2027 is maybe more what we see. But I honestly, he's talented enough to elbow his way in. But I use that phrasing specifically because if he's going to get regular playing time, he's going to have to force it as opposed to him being given opportunities.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting team. I'm eager to see with all those personnel losses what Oklahoma looks like as they, in year number 2 in the SEC play. But when you look at Tennessee, I mean, talk about a wild fall, dealing with will he, won't he, with the whole Tony thing, flirting with the Giants, and then eventually leaving, and then Josh getting the job, and then bringing Geralman in, and all of this disruption. Frank Anderson leaving, pitching coach. It's been a lot to reconcile, to understand where Tennessee is going to be this year. What's your overall feel on them? Are they just going to? I mean, obviously, it's the big question: is can they keep this train rolling? They've got a lot of resources, a lot of momentum as a program. Maybe what are some of the warning signs, or what are the reasons that it will, if it continues to go, why will it keep going?
Boy, that's the $64,000 question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a dated reference. That's a game show from like 50 years ago. Back when $64,000 was an unimaginable amount of money to win on a game show. Anyway, that's a tough question. And if it slips, I don't think it's necessarily going to slip because Josh Elander is there instead of Tony Vitello, but I am fascinated by not having Frank Anderson there. Josh Reynolds was obviously kind of learned under Frank's wing, if you will, and he's well thought of. So it's not necessarily a slight on him, but in Frank, you're talking about one of the most accomplished pitching coaches in college baseball history. Like, and that might kind of take people aback, but when you think about the stops he's had in his career, the success he's had, the players he's put in pro ball. Oh, by the way, I think in hindsight, we look at it and his head coaching career actually was probably better than he was given credit for in the moment. So like, this is a guy who's done a lot in college baseball, and you don't just lose a guy like that. And
it's a lot of brain drain, no doubt.
100%. And so that's the part that I actually am a little more skittish about, because it's a combination of things. One is you lose a pitching coach who's that accomplished, and two is that they're going into a year where they're going to have to answer some questions on the mound, right? I mean, I think about when you look at the rotation, I think they've got, obviously, I should have said this up front. Obviously, they have top tier talent, Omaha upside, potential national title contender upside. Let's say that up front. But when you look at the mound, who's their Friday guy? Is it Tegan Kuhns? He certainly pitched well enough on the Cape. Is it Brandon Arvidsson, who was dominant at times out of the bullpen last year, but didn't start really last year? Is it Evan Blanco, who has pitched in Omaha with Virginia? It's not necessarily like a blow it by you stuff guy, but he's obviously been there, done that. Is it Landon Mack, the transfer from Rutgers, who pitched for Team USA? And I'm not saying it all comes down to who's their Friday guy, because that's a rotation that no matter who starts Friday, who starts Tuesday, they're going to be
a good guy. Yeah.
Right. They're going to be in pretty good shape. But when you start to really split hairs between these teams at the top of the SEC, that kind of thing matters. Who is your dude you have to go toe to toe with all of the other dudes in the SEC? And so when you talk about what are going to be some of the things we can look at to figure out what is the ceiling for this team, that's where my mind goes first, because I just think having that guy on Friday, that, to use the example of another team we just talked about, the Kyson Witherspoon, you just throw out there and say, look, he's not going to win every Friday because this is the SEC, but we're pretty confident we're going to be in every Friday. Yeah. And Tennessee having one of those guys, because they don't have a proven one. That's the point. They're going to need to find one. And that's where my mind goes first when we talk about how good this Tennessee team can be.
Yeah. One of the guys that's fascinated me is freshman Cameron Appenzeller.
Yeah.
He might, you don't want to put that on a freshman, but he's certainly talented enough to emerge into that role. Do you see, I understand he had a really good fall, but it's the fall. So where do you see his role? Certainly I'm sure they would love to just roll him out there on Tuesday and let him get his feet wet and then see how it goes. But where do you land there?
Yeah, I think a midweek role sounds like a good fit for him. Now he may have kind of already graduated past that a
Yeah,
little bit
right.
with the fall he had. It helps that he's left-handed, right? Because it's a situation where there's only so many of those guys, and you're always kind of feel like you need more of them. And so I think that helps. Now,
Mm-hmm.
again, it's kind of a similar thing we were talking about with Alec Blair, where it's like, okay, we just talked about 4 relatively proven starters. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
not proven from a Friday standpoint, but 4 guys that have shown that they can compete at that level. So is there room there? And it comes down to a philosophy question, because I think ultimately Elander and Josh Reynolds are going to have to decide, okay, this guy's an electric arm that we're lucky to get to campus, could have easily been a pro ball. Do we want to use him on the weekends in our most important games?
Yeah.
Or do we need to be more careful than that and use him on Tuesdays and stretch him out to prepare him to be a weekend starter for us in 2027 or potentially in the postseason of 2026?
Yeah.
And that's a philosophical question. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer there necessarily. It's just a matter of how do you treat a highly touted freshman like this? Do you kind of throw him in the deep end of SEC play, or do you throw him in the other deep end of starting games right away as a freshman? And I don't know that we have that answer yet. We'll see, but it's something they're going to have to grapple with because he was really good this fall.
Yeah. So positionally, I look at this team and I see a lot of flexibility. I see a lot of guys that look similar to me. And I don't really know how that's going to shake out. What were some of the positional themes, guys, maybe leaders at positions that you learned?
Yeah, so the I think one of the guys that everything else hinges on is Henry Ford.
Yeah.
Because he's going to be in the lineup every day. It was just an absolutely outstanding fall from an offensive standpoint for Henry Ford, and he's a little bit positionless, which can be seen a couple of different ways. One is he is versatile. He can play the outfield. He can play the corner infield. But it's also a little bit of a backhanded compliment because it also kind of means that he's not such a standout defender anywhere that you have to put him somewhere.
Yeah.
So where he lands, I think is going to end up being kind of like the first domino to fall, and then everyone else kind of falls in around him. Third base was kind of like the initial buzz this fall as to where his landing spot is perhaps most likely. And I think part of that is because first base is a place where you can, I don't want to say put anybody, but you kind of like to leave first base open for either A, a really advanced defender, or B, an extra bat, right? So there's that. And then the outfield is, I mean, they're pretty crowded in the outfield too. When you talk about Reese Chapman is back, Jay Abernathy is back, Chris Newstrom showed some things last year. They really like Blake Grimmer, who's a guy that people probably haven't heard too much from. Garrett Wright, the transfer from Bowling Green, is probably going to be in the mix in the outfield because catcher is also pretty crowded.
Blaine Brown. Yeah.
Blaine Brown, 100%. That's a great name. And by the way, I should mention Blaine Brown was somebody that Josh Elander, if people listen to the episode of Highway to Hoover when he had Josh Elander on, like Blaine Brown is someone he brought up just on his own. Like he was not prompted. He brought him up as somebody who the Vol fans are going to really enjoy seeing. So to me, Henry Ford is kind of like the linchpin to it all, and then everything else kind of slots around him. I think when I get a little more granular, I think one of the keys for this group is going to be that sophomore class. Levi Clark, Abernathy, Manny Marin, how good those guys are. It reminds me a little bit of like that when Christian Moore and Blake Burke were sophomores, right? Where it was like, okay, we got a taste as they were freshmen. Now what? And I think we saw like Christian Moore took off and Blake Burke kind of struggled as a sophomore. Like that's been well documented. And it was one of the reasons why Tennessee maybe wasn't quite as good that year as we anticipated them being. And so how that sophomore class takes that jump, I think is another big key for Tennessee, because if those guys are all monsters, and they could be, then we're looking at, again, one of the best lineups in the country in a national title contender. That's not the only factor that plays into that, obviously, but it is a big one.
Yeah. Is there an area that really concerns you about Tennessee, or is it just more that hey, they've got so many different ways this team could go roster wise. Where does it? Just figuring that out and getting the best 9 on the field.
Concern is a little stronger than what I would say in this regard, but I will say we should not underestimate how important Nate Snead was to this operation. As whatever situation Tennessee was in on the mound, they could sprinkle Nate Snead on it and fix it. It was like we need a spot start. We need to close a game. It's the 3rd inning and our starter's out. Nate Snead was the answer to all of those. And they don't necessarily on paper, especially if Arvidsson is in the rotation, because if Arvidsson's not in the rotation, maybe he's that guy. Right. But I think they kind of want Arvidsson in the rotation. So I don't know that they have that guy. Now, one guy to watch in that regard is Brady Frederick. He's a transfer from East Tennessee State. However, he's more of a funky guy than he is a stuff guy. And whenever you're bringing a funk guy into the SEC, there's always a little bit of trepidation about, is the stuff going to hold up well enough? Now, his stuff is still pretty decent. It's not like he's not slinging, he's not totally just slinging junk up there like, I don't want to name names because that might come off as rude, but he's able to move the ball around, but he's not Nate Snead 97-mile-an-hour sinkers. That's just not what his game is. So that leaves a hole in the pitching staff. And so I think they'll figure it out just fine. I don't think anybody's going to shed a tear over whether Tennessee can find their key reliever. Yeah. But we should not underestimate how important he was to the entire operation the last few years.
One more question for you on Tennessee. So they opened the Globe Life tournament against UCLA week 3. Who starts on the mound? Who bats 3-hole?
Oh boy. Okay. Who bats 3-hole? I'll go Henry Ford in the 3-hole. The other thing would be Levi Clark. That was the other name I had in my head, but I think Levi Clark's maybe right. I think it's those two guys bat 2nd, 3rd, or 4th in some order. Right. They're in there somewhere. But I'll go Henry Ford, and I think I'm going to go Tegan Kuhns. I just think for me, he showed on the Cape, the fastball is firm. There's that, but his breaking ball is, when it's on, it is a pitch he can absolutely dominate games with. He showed an ability to work deeper into games. Now, nobody on the Cape throws a bunch of innings. Nobody's throwing complete games in the Cape. But as far as the Cape goes, he was working deep into games. He was mixing his pitches. He was navigating starts. This wasn't just go out there and air it out for 60 pitches and we'll see where you're at. He was really working, as a starter. And I use that as a starter specifically because he was navigating that. So I'll go Tegan Kuhns. But it is one of those rotations, every once in a while we get one of these where it's you throw the names in a hat and pull them out one by one, and you're probably going to end up with something about as good as anything else. Right. It feels like it really could be that kind of rotation. So I like Kuhns and Arvidsson as 2 of those starters, and I think the 3rd spot comes down to just who pitches the best in the lead up to the season. Honestly, it might just be that. Right,
and of course that's going to be such a fun weekend. You've got Tennessee, Mississippi State, Texas A&M there against Arizona State, UCLA, and Virginia Tech. I mean, that's going to be an incredible and that's 2 weeks before the conference play starts. So you kind of get, SEC type of competition, or for the other leagues, conference type competition, and really get an understanding of what you got.
Yeah, I mean, that might be the best weekend on the. I haven't. You might have looked at it. You've looked at it, I think, a lot deeper than I have, Mark. No disrespect to our friends at Peak Events. They've got great tournaments, but I don't think anything beats that Globe Life field that weekend. That to me, I think, is probably the best.
Yeah, that's going to be so good. I mean, that weekend, you've also got the Astros College Classic. Texas is going to play Coastal Carolina on Friday night. I mean, that may be one of the better matchups considering the possible pitching starters in that one. That would be a lot of fun too. So I can't wait to dive into all this stuff. We got so much planned as we get ready to do our season preview. Loads of content coming at you. So it's that time.
No kidding. I'm looking at the calendar now just because I guess I'm some sort of masochist and I want to look at how little time we have. So today's the 17th.
TikTok. Yep.
I mean, we're we're like 3 weeks away from having preview content on the website.
Some stuff, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm excited. I mean, it's daunting because we have so much stuff to do, between now and then, but we're almost there, man. We've almost made it. We're inside of 2 months, so we're barreling towards it. I can't wait. So that's an episode. We've wrapped up the fall. Last couple teams we hadn't deep dived into, but 2 really fascinating teams. Can't wait to see them on the field in the spring. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra and D1Baseball.com. Thanks again to our friends at Academy Sports and Outdoors for sponsoring this episode of Highway to Hoover and every episode of Highway to Hoover during the 2025 calendar year. Thanks again to Mark, as always, for joining me, and thank you, the listeners, for listening.